I'm Charles Carletta. I'm the Secretary of the Institute and General Counsel at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, about 2.5 hours south of here. And I am one of the original founders, for lack of a better term, of the concept of this conference, now in its 23rd year. And I am very proud to be here, and more proud than anything else to see all of you here with us today. Thank you for coming. It is my distinct pleasure to be the person that today announces, or introduces rather, the President of the University of Vermont as our kickoff speaker for the morning. Tom Sullivan is a lawyer. Now, I stop there because I need to share an observation with you. It is very rare for those of us who serve as college counsel to find from amongst the ranks of us someone who ascends all the way to the presidency of an institution. We have 2 or 3 of these locally, or rather now in this particular time frame, and Tom is one of them and one of the most preeminent of us. He is the 26th president of the University of Vermont and is just appointed as of July 2012. He was, prior to that, senior vice president for academic affairs and provost at the University of Minnesota from July 2004 through January 2012. And prior to that, he served as the dean of the University of Minnesota Law School from 1995 to 2002. Upon finishing his term as dean, he returned to full-time research and teaching. I'm going to stop there because I want to share an observation with you. Those of you who have come to earlier sessions this morning already have heard us talk about the interdisciplinary nature of what it is we're here to do today. So we have, to begin the day, someone who is a college president, who was an academic dean, who was a provost, and prior to that was a practicing litigator in the antitrust law field of law. And prior to that, he clerked for judges and consulted with the Senate Judiciary Committee, and all of this is in the bio, by the way. For those of you who have the book, there's a printed list of bios. For those of you who have the disc, it's on the disc. It's significant to us, though, that a person who has served on the faculty, has served as a dean, has served as a provost, and is now a president and understands student issues, is the kickoff speaker for us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the President of the University of Vermont, Thomas Sullivan.
Thank you for that very warm introduction. I am delighted to be here. When I joined the University of Vermont a year ago, July, and I saw on the agenda that this university was hosting this conference, the very first thing I said to my colleagues was, well, how could it be? We don't have a law school. What are we doing hosting? And what is this all about? Well, 1 year later, here I am, and good morning. I am delighted to share some reflections with you. I will apologize for the weather. Had any of you been, and maybe you were with us in the last 2 months, we've had the most spectacular weather up until sometime this morning. So, but then if you're going to be in this beautiful Davis Center for 2 or 2.5 days, the weather shouldn't be of a moment to you with the exception of dinner. But it's supposed to clear, I think. I am delighted to welcome you to the 23rd. I was chatting with some colleagues earlier this morning. That means in 2 years we're going to have a big gala event here, obviously celebrating the 25th conference on legal issues in higher education. I thought I might just preview, as any good lawyer with a jury in front of himself or herself would do, preview for you the outline of where I'm going this morning, and so you'll know exactly where we are right along the line. I thought I would start with a brief notation about the history of this wonderful conference and some of the topics that you're going to be exposed to along the way. And then, as that lovely introduction might have implied, I thought it might be interesting for you to hear from a president who is also a lawyer and who has spent 35 years in legal academy and very proud of it, I might say. And the kind of thinking that comes with that. And then I wanted to mention very briefly 2 issues that are paramount to all of our institutions and that is compliance, and that obviously is the major topic that will follow me with Professor Lake, and also an issue of something that I've been interested in for a very long time, and that is First Amendment and academic freedom. And then I thought I might wrap up this morning and share with you what I think are really the key the job role that I have, or any president or chancellor has today, and that is my theme of managing expectations and relationships, and we'll come to that towards the end of my remarks. But this conference has had a wonderful history. I'm just learning about it. I couldn't be prouder, and I appreciate and thank the leadership who have put this together. As Dean Acheson might have said at one time, present at the creation 23 years ago, and so delighted that we're hosting it here in mostly beautiful Burlington. As I understand it, this conference got started because there were so many issues that were percolating, so many people across our colleges and universities in all of the fields, from student to attorneys. And of course, we know that there is the National Association of College University Attorneys that are exclusively attorneys. And so there was a real need and a demand to have the broader constituent of leadership on campus come together annually and talk about what are the pressing and key issues of the day. And hence this wonderful idea some 23, 24 years ago. And I am delighted that we have a broader and diverse array of university leadership in our room today, because the topics that you're going to have an opportunity to discuss are very practical and real. We live with them, we work with them every day on our campuses. And it gives so many of you, particularly those who may come from smaller colleges or universities, an opportunity to use this session as a real training opportunity and to think about the great issues as you share strategies and challenges and day-to-day problems. We're also pleased to be web streaming this for others who could not attend. I think it's the first time we're doing that. We have some 9 locations web streaming, and they will be able to raise questions as well, and we hope over the years that will actually grow. Not to reduce the attendance here, but to be able to expand across the country of those who might not have been able to attend. Well, if you look at your program, it really is a rich, and I wish I could spend more time with you in the next couple of days on these topics, because as I look at your agenda, it turns out it almost looks like my day calendar or my weekly calendar, quite frankly. Really a diverse offering of topics from university compliance, I mentioned a moment ago, and the tensions between the new and increasing regulatory burdens, and from a presidential standpoint, I will tell you, and the costs of regulation, which are probably in the top 5 or 6 of our university cost drivers today. From student affairs, professional track, where you're going to talk about judicial conduct and intellectual property. Students in crisis, campus sexual violence, drugs, alcohol, all of those are huge issues on our campus today, and you can't pick up the Chronicle of Higher Education or Inside Higher Education today without seeing schools that are having real problems with managing and leading and on sexual violence. The administrative, executive, and HR tasks, my heavens, the questions of access and affordability and admissions, the kind of the seed corn of all of our institutions today, admissions, and how we make sure that those front doors of our educational institutions are open, and so our students can have that wonderful opportunity to succeed once they're through the admissions process. We're all driven every day by the complexities of technology and cyber attack possibilities, and something that I've been grappling with in the last week, and all of us will be from time to time, and that is the Affordable Care Act, the costs associated with, whether individually or as an institution. And on the faculty track, a topic I'm going to speak about in just here a moment from now, First Amendment and academic freedom issues that have become another important part of our university culture. And then additionally, we're delighted here at the University of Vermont to have Gary Margolis and Stephen Healy with us at some point in the conference to talk about the new National Center for Campus Public Safety. You may know that our dear friend here at the university, the senior United States Senator in the Congress, Patrick Leahy, was able to get through the Congress and the Department of Justice a $2.3 million grant to establish a new center on public safety on campuses, and we here at UVM will have a relationship with that new center, and we hope that that will be able to be a large part of information sharing with all of our constituencies. So it's a very rich program that you're going to have an opportunity to engage in, and I hope it continues to build, as I say, every year. Well, let me turn then to some perspectives as one who has been in higher education for 35 years and in higher education administration for 25 years, both as a dean twice and a provost and now a president. And along the way, always the lawyer, I think. Those of you who have gone to law school or know of friends or family members that have, we're sometimes called strange individuals. We simply can't take out of that persona that analytical thinking that we learned in law school. And I will tell you, as a higher education administrator for 25 of the last 35 years, I can't imagine my job, whether law school dean or provost or now president. I simply can't imagine it without the analytical and legal training and experience that I've had. I know many people do it, of course, but there isn't a day in my job as provost or as president, not a day that I don't have to apply or where I see legal issues that perhaps others don't see. And I think my general counsel at the university and her office would tell you it's a full employment office, at least since I've been here, because, and gratefully, her office is about 10 steps from mine, so I am in and out, and she is in and out of my office every single day about issues that I wish didn't implicate law, but they simply do, given in part what you're going to hear after me from Peter about the regulatory society that we live in today. And you'll see from my remarks as I continue that kind of analytical process that I got a very long time ago in law school. But to put that in context, I've always believed, I've taught in law schools for 25 years. Been dean of 2 of them, been on either permanent or visiting about 6 law school faculties. The role of a lawyer, and quite frankly, one of my themes I'm going to share with you in a moment, and the role of a president is to identify, to limit, to resolve, to contain problems. That's what a lawyer does for a client. Identify, limit, resolve, in some way, contain problems. And for me, the key role of a president, and I'll develop this a bit more, is really to manage expectations and relationships of a very broad constituency. In this case, the constituents range from a governor to the political leadership of the state, to 30 senators, to 150 House members, to a 24-person board of trustees, to faculty, staff, students, alumni, parents, donors, friends. And in the state of Vermont, that also includes all 640,000 people, because in Vermont, such a small state, as I was told upon my arrival immediately, and those of you in the audience from Burlington, you will know exactly what I mean. Tom, this is a small state. Everybody knows everybody. And then the refrain was, and most of us are actually related. And so whatever you say, wherever you are in Vermont, whether it's Burlington or Bennington or Brattleboro or the state capital in Montpelier, everyone will hear what you say. It gets back quickly, and everyone will have an opinion. And in Vermont, everybody wants to vote on that opinion too. So managing expectations and relationships and issues is 100% of my job. And I think that's true whether you're in a public institution, a private institution, research, medium-sized or small. It is about the expectations that our constituents have and how we as leaders, all of you included, how you all manage those expectations and relationships. That's a lot like the lawyer trying to identify where those problems lie and how to resolve them. Well, this morning, when Peter Lake follows me and takes the podium for the first substantive presentation, he's going to talk about, in a way, compliance. We all want, and I hope insist, on strong ethical cultures at our university. And he'll get into more detail about that, but it is absolutely critical that we bring those kinds of standards to our universities and colleges, because if we don't, and if it doesn't come from the top in terms of those codes of conduct or those ethical prescriptions or the culture of one's institution, it will come back in many different ways to cause the problems that will need then be resolved. And over the last 50 years, one of the great themes of higher education and its development will be the regulatory state of higher education. And from where I sit, the costs associated with that. For example, here at the University of Vermont, thank heavens I haven't read all of these, but I'm told that we have some 600 laws or regulations that govern this relatively small university. 600. So many of you probably have more than those. This high regulatory road that we've all been on for a long time can take a lot of our time and costs, as I mentioned. So we need to be mindful of those rules and regulations that are key to making sure that we have a culture that's supportive of our mission and our vision for the university. But they also can be very difficult to interpret and to apply. And this is my only prescription, Peter, might be, this is where a very large dose of common sense has to be applied. Sometimes we can over-regulate and over-lawyer rules and regulations. And from my perspective, I always say, let's use a common sense approach to this and not a highly regulatory or highly rigid interpretation. But the sweep of regulations today, my heavens, finance and business, research, including all of our SPA programs or spending of competitive funds, all the employment regulations, campus health and safety, and the list goes on right through financial aid. Compliance is very, very important, and you do not want to understate it. But I also think we need to be careful not to overplay it with regard to it consuming the main event, and that's trying to promote our mission and our values and our vision every day at the university. And there is this increased tension. I think it's healthy, but it needs to be recognized, and that is an increased tension between compliance to ethical, appropriate behavior, and also managing risks. Universities for a very long time, and it continues to be true today, tend to be risk averse. That is, we're fairly conservative in how we look at opportunities. And I think more and more we have to be better at managing risks, not merely avoiding those risks, because many of those risks may well bear fruit for appropriate investments in our academic enterprises. And so that means we have to be better at identifying the risks and managing those risks consistent with compliance programs. It's not just compliance per se, it's managing risk in the context of common sense application of compliance. Well, I want to also, in addition to compliance, headline another area at the campus right now that I think is very important. Historically, it has been, and it will be going forward, and that is some thought about academic freedom and First Amendment issues at the university. Last week, you may have seen, maybe it's 2 weeks ago now, I had an opportunity, along with Larry White, who is the general counsel of the University of Delaware, of doing an op-ed or an essay in the Chronicle of Higher Education on academic freedom. The reason for that opportunity, I got an invitation by the Chronicle to write this because of some earlier work on academic freedom and First Amendment issues and tenure code standards that I worked at the University of Minnesota, asked me to do an op-ed for them. And we published that, and I think there's some very good news in the Academy, at least if you share my viewpoint about First Amendment and academic freedom. You may not, but I believe a university is the marketplace of ideas. This is the place where we have the responsibility to discover new knowledge and to be able to transmit that knowledge in our research, basic all the way through translational or applied research, so that research and new discovery can actually help advance civilization in our society. Well, it seems to me that we can't get to that location unless we believe that the university is a marketplace of ideas. Some of them can be obnoxious, some of them can be very provocative, some of them can keep us up at night, I can assure you. But if we're not the marketplace of ideas, where else in this society will we be able to get that free exchange and engagement? I don't think we're seeing it in Washington today. It has to be in our universities and our colleges. And so Larry and I tried to sketch the current law, which has rapidly been changing. And it really is a place where faculty now have academic freedom, which is kind of a subset of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and every state constitution has a First Amendment section, have freedom to research, to write, and to speak on matters of public importance in their day-to-day responsibilities. That means well beyond, in my view, the curriculum that they may be teaching, and they may opine on subjects far and wide as long as it's in the public interest and as long as it's related in some way to their responsibility. And then, of course, what the courts do is they try to balance that speech, which may be very provocative, if not obnoxious, with the university's right to harmony and balance, and there is a balancing test there, but as long as that speech or that written expression is cabined in the public interest and a part of the duties of the faculty member, broadly defined, that will be protected now as academic freedom. There was a major question since the Supreme Court decision, United States Supreme Court decision in 2006, which seemed to throw that in flux, but actually three United States Courts of Appeals decisions, I say three because one just came down late last week out of the Sixth Circuit, affirming the robustness of academic freedom and its centrality to our campuses. And anyway, that goes back to those old principles of Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes about the marketplace of ideas. And if you don't like the speech, what I've always said as a faculty member, as a dean, as administrator, as Justice Holmes would remind us, then counter it with more speech and better speech so that the public can figure out for themselves where the right truth lies. But it is not in cutting off some speech. It's coming back with the great debate and the great discussions. And as I said earlier, if our universities can't handle this in a very civil way, we certainly can't expect it in larger society. We simply have to be the role model, in my view, on that. Well, to wrap up my introductory remarks this morning, I should say as a caveat, because we probably have largely administrators, and by the way, that's a proud term I use. support for all of our academic missions in this room this morning. The First Amendment law that I just expressed does not apply to us, by the way. Does not apply to us. When we take on administrative roles, we give up some of those First Amendment rights. This goes way back in Supreme Court history, and the dividing line is that you can have robust speech right up until the time that the university establishes a policy or articulates an approach, at which point, if you as a university administrator, outside any faculty role that you may have, if you decide to publicly disagree with the university's position, you may be terminated for insubordination. So we don't have the same rights that our faculty do, and that should be clear this morning. Well, as I said in closing my remarks, so if I'm right that these jobs are largely, and I think down into all of yours as well, at least to a certain extent, is about managing expectations of our constituents and those relationships between and among our constituents and the big ideas that we're trying to push and underscore. If it is about managing expectations and relationships, how does one go about doing that? And I think the simple answer is to be clear and forthright as possible in articulating what your individual mission or aspirational goals are, right from the start as you lead an organization within the university. And for me, that means having a very clear strategic plan. A strategic plan that is dynamic, it's organic, it's always changing, it's not something you draft and put on the shelf and collect dust. And in fact, here we call ours a strategic action plan, because I wanted to connote, when we use that phrase, I wanted to connote the importance of action. It's not just a plan, it's not just theory, we're putting this in place, action. And so we call it a strategic action plan. And I thought I might just share with you the one that I announced a year ago when I came on to the university. And then I want to follow up with, okay, pretty broad parameters, and many of you may have almost the same or very similar ones. So how do you actually interpret? How do we know from a constituent standpoint, how do you interpret that broad aspirational goal that I'm about to mention? And I will conclude with remarks on decision-making criteria that at least I'm trying to employ. So first, my 4 strategic action aspirational goals are: number 1, affordability and financial access for our students; number 2, enhancing quality at every opportunity. So those are the 2 substantive ones: affordability and enhancing quality value at every opportunity. And number 3, which may be a bit more strategic or tactical, and making sure that we have strategic alignment of our budget and priority. It's one thing to pontificate, it's another thing to actually align your budget and resources with what you say you're going to do, and do it very tightly and with discipline. And make sure that your constituent knows exactly that roadmap and where you're going, because you told them already why. Next is, obviously, all of us, we got to increase revenue at every opportunity so that we can invest and reinvest in the academic enterprise. And then finally, we all need to be as effective and as efficient as we can in managing our resources so that we can take those reallocations and invest them where we said our priorities were. Very simple strategic action plan based upon affordability for our students and the balance of that in enhancing quality at every opportunity. And those are a little tough today in this university worlds we have, where we see shrinking demographics on the admission side across the United States. It's particularly true here in the Eastern Seaboard. And at the same time, having enough resources that you're supporting students in that recruitment process, and enough to make sure that the facilities and the program and the curricula and the degree they're going to have is actually coming with enhanced value, enhanced quality. That's not always an easy balance, but it is our charge. And how do we go about deciding that? Well, the decision-making criteria that I have used and we are using at the university are the following. Now, one caveat. Not every one of these has to be demonstrated before a decision will be made, but it's a collective balance among and between these decision-making criteria. Number one, always ask the question, are we advancing quality and excellence with the decision we're about to make? Number two, does the proposal in front of us really align with centrality of the university's mission and vision and focus? A third, do we have particular comparative advantages at the university? You all do, and multiple strengths that we should be playing on and making sure that our priorities get aligned with where we have quality and where we have comparative advantages. One that I frequently say here at the University of Vermont, we sit on this beautiful large lake, Lake Champlain, the largest outside of the Great Lakes, freshwater lake. We do preeminent research on fresh water. That's a huge comparative advantage when we can literally walk down to the lake and begin the research, as our great colleagues do here. Many of you have comparative advantages. Will the decision actually have a transformative and impact? Impact, not just counting numbers up, so many grants, so many dollars. What's the impact of all those grants and dollars? Is there a paradigm shift here? Are we leading a different thinking process that will lead to advancement throughout society? Will the decision you're making actually increase interdisciplinarity and academic synergy between and among your academic units? We simply, colleagues, cannot stay in academic silos today. It was a great experiment in 1929 when the University of Chicago started the department, but we must promote at every opportunity interdisciplinarity and increased academic synergy. One has to do cost-benefit analysis with each of these decisions, and then ultimately one asks, will this decision make us more distinctive, more unique, as we see how our institution is placed and how our reputation will unfold? So uniqueness and distinction. And finally, one of my mentors always told me, and I will pass it on to you, Tom, when you're making a decision, when you got a problem, try to solve more than one at a time. So if you see a collection of issues that seem to be related, see if you can't bring a decision-making process together that will solve many more than just the one. Well, with those thoughts this morning, I wish you well on this wonderful conference. We're delighted that you're here. I'm particularly pleased that the University of Vermont has been hosting this for 23 years, and we hope next year and then come back for the 25th, and we'll have a big gala for all of you. Best wishes. Thanks so much for coming. And now I get to introduce the real speaker of this morning to open up your session. Peter Lake, as many of you know, is one of the foremost authorities in our country on higher education. He holds the Dana Chair at Stetson University and is director of the Center for Excellence in Higher Education. He teaches and writes in higher education issues, tort law, insurance law, and by the way, those are all related, Peter, I know, to your other interests. One of the most internationally recognized experts in the field of international law and policy today. He's the author of 3 very important books on higher education law. All 3 are over here, and I'm sure he'll be happy to autograph. And he's going to talk to you, importantly, about something I just noted, which is this wonderful tension, dichotomy of university as facilitator or university as compliance regulator. And I think he might hint to you that we need to get back to focusing on the core of the educational mission. It's about teaching and learning and research and civic engagement. Thank you very much.
Terribly happy with this government shutdown, but I have to be honest, it's been a real relief not to get a dear colleague every week. As many of you know, I chair the Stetson Law Conference in Florida. We're in our 35th year, and one of the things we're going to do this year just for fun, I think we're going to have a dear colleague happy hour to just share stories among our colleagues about how we wish we could get more dear colleague letters coming down from our government. Reflecting on some of the remarks from this morning, and thanks for the gracious introduction, President. We had a chance to have Parker Young visit with us this year, and I thought it might be nice to take a moment to reflect on the history of our events and where we've come from. Many, many years ago, Parker Young pioneered the first interdisciplinary law and policy conference. And it was really a revolutionary idea to think of doing an event that didn't have a membership group associated with it, or that wasn't sponsored by a private entity or any other organization, that the only energy that would support it was people who were willing to come out of their own pocket or their institution's pockets to come and share willfully and deliberately and equally across disciplines. And it's always been a fantastic idea, but always an idea that struggled to have a core audience because we don't have a membership group. Many of us are members of groups. I'm a member of NACUA, and we have an enormous event. We have turkey dinners and lobsters and all the stuff you'd expect at one of those wonderful kinds of events. But these kinds of conferences survive and thrive entirely because there are people like you out there who believe in the power of interdisciplinary work. And particularly during these dark economic times, and with the regulatory world that we live in, I applaud you for making an effort to continue to keep this work alive. I have this terrible fear that we'll end up becoming compartmentalized again, and we'll just go into our little bunkers and do our job, and the students will suffer. Interdisciplinary energy is really the root, I think, of American higher education. It's real strength. And again, with no particular membership group to support this or no private foundation to underwrite it, we do this work because we love it and we go forward. And again, there are so few events of this kind. Although many people put on law and policy trainings and events, the Stetson and Vermont event are still the really only truly academically driven events of their kind in their country. And I hope that you'll continue to support these and speak of this kind of training and the uniqueness that it can bring to the field. So I want to congratulate the President on keeping the flame alive. Charlie Carletta, who you met first thing this morning, who I think has been the torchbearer of this idea here and throughout the country, and all of you and your board and your planning efforts for putting this together, and thank you today. So I've got a pretty somber topic, Compliance University, the great federal army marching out from Washington and taking over American higher education. And I remember well what Howard Gardner said to me just a few years ago before this all happened. He came to my higher ed event at Stetson, and half the audience didn't know who he was, which was sort of remarkable to me. And as he walked off the podium, he said, "Please don't let happen to higher ed what happened to K through 12. He said, "Don't let higher education turn into every child left behind." I paraphrase a little bit. And I do worry a little bit about that as we enter into this compliance world, that a takeover of the core mission of an institution starts to be driven by federal mandates, government officials, and our most precious resource of all, our academic energy, gets drained into filling out forms and going to yet another due diligence training and endless meetings with lawyers and new campus teams, and the people who suffer in the end are the people we're supposed to deliver education to in the first place, our students. It takes our educational energy away. So today is a story about surprise and some dark energies invading our space, and also one of hope, because I really actually believe that this is a reformative time in higher education with a lot of opportunity and a lot of positive that's sometimes a little hard to see when the boogeyman is out in force. And believe me, he's out in force these days. It seems like every day, except for this government shutdown, the federal government has some new idea of how we should run our campuses. Who here manages residence life facilities, wants to identify? Yeah, I feel your pain, because in just the last year, our federal government has told us that we essentially have to run Cirque du Soleil by redesigning the comfort service animal metrics in ways that I even struggle to understand. We now have a full panoply of circus animals running around our residence halls, and if we don't provide that, skunks and ponies and horses and otters and all of these things, we may be in a lot of trouble. And I don't mean to make light of it, but it was an interesting development to just find out one day that, yes, you now have to have a broader range of animals in your facilities, even though your facilities were not designed for this kind of living arrangement necessarily, and it's going to take a lot of resources and training to get up to speed, but good luck to you as you design this new world. And that's just one of many surprises that our federal government has had in store for us over the years. As we go through today's talk, we'll talk about some of the other startling moments. Certainly, again, as a prefatory remark to this, the defining event in the history of higher education law and policy from a compliance point of view is April 4th, 2011. I'm a Boston kid. I moved across the Mason-Dixon line. I have to say I do enjoy it quite a bit, but I miss my hometown sometimes. But I sometimes think of April 4, 2011 as the Battle of Bunker Hill in higher ed. It signaled a coming revolution, a sea change in the management of things, and nothing has ever really been the same since the Dear Colleague letter of April 4, 2011 dropped. Feels like we've been playing defense ever since. I turned to my hero, Bobby Orr, the great hockey player for the Bruins, and I know we probably have a few Canadians fans here, and I'm sorry for that for you. And Bobby Orr did something magnificent in hockey. He turned defense into offense, changed the game. And so that today when we leave, I'm going to encourage everybody to think a little bit like Bobby Orr. Change the game, stop running from compliance initiatives, embrace it, flip the energy, and change the nature of the game. That is where we are headed today. Now, something else is happening today. And I know many of you have seen me speak over the years, and you are not used to seeing me with a PowerPoint. This is Bob Dylan going electric, and we're just going to see how this works. For years and years, I've been the Luddite of higher education law and policy, holding out against technology at all costs, but today we go electric, and we'll see how that works. So we'll see if we can advance the first slide. Are you with me? Huh? Does it work? Yeah! Man versus technology, game win 1-0 in the first quarter. This quote comes from Texas A&M and relates to the way that Texas A&M University has embraced the facilitator concept, which I think their articulation is a little better than anything I could have written, because they did it for themselves. But years and years ago, Bob Bickle and I crafted a very simple idea in the first edition of Rights and Responsibilities, and we thought that the future of higher education lay in some kind of a balance and sharing. A very simple idea, really. Instead of being babysitters or bystanders, we'd instead imagine ourselves as facilitators and try to create conditions under which people could make good choices for themselves, but not take on the responsibility for making those choices, and to teach students shared responsibility, that we are in this together, and that honestly, particularly with safety, but even now I think with financial decisions, ultimately the burden of life and education will fall more heavily on a student than it ever will fall on a university or an administrator. They're the ones that have to live with getting hurt. They're the ones that live with the unmanageable debt. We may play a role in that, but they always have to realize that no matter how much we can help and facilitate, the responsibility for choosing rests on their shoulders. This at the time was an inflammatory idea. People were a little surprised at this, and it took a lot of work to get folks to accept this idea, because I think we were coming out of an era that Bob Bickle and I described as the bystander era, where there was a lot of incentive in higher education for administrators in particular not to engage in student life too actively. The law was sending a lot of messages: don't assume a duty that you don't have, don't get involved off campus. And if some of you remember Greek life management circa 1995 or even 2001, you got really some inconsistent messages. Go do your job, just don't do it too well. We don't want to get too involved in the events off campus because that's how we'll get sued. And I think an entire generation of administrators grew up fearful that they would be the person on campus who assumed a duty that they didn't have and then sink their institution in a heroic lawsuit. When Bob and I crafted our first edition of the book, we thought we need to fight against that. We need to get administrators empowered. Our work at Stetson for 35 years has been oriented towards collaborative decision-making between lawyers and administrators, true interdisciplinary work where there's no hierarchy, but we're trying to accomplish the same goals together. And we feel the same way with our students, that we want to empower them to work with us to make better decisions, as opposed to step back and watch train wrecks unfold right in front of us. Certainly some of the disasters of bystanding have been written across the stars recently. And I think the Penn State incident, which will be talked about for years and years, could be a signature event, both in terms of narrative and also in terms of law, in terms of setting the tone of the real cost of looking the other way when something bad is happening, and even worse, potentially, and again, we're seeing this as it evolves, but the potential of not just looking the other way, but maybe even trying to sweep it under the rug. Bystanding brings tremendous cost with it. We felt facilitation was the way to transcend that and to walk out of it. What I never saw coming, and I don't think Bob did either really, was this new compliance world, the major changes that were on the horizon. And I have to say, the one thing that startled me the most was when April 4, 2011, Joe Biden stepped up in front of the entire country and said, and somewhat blithely, by the way, that students in college are entitled to as safe a possible learning experience as we can provide. Safe as possible. And I nearly fell out of my chair because for 20 years I'd been trying to get people to accept the idea of reasonable care, which had been a fight in the courts and in the public opinion. And all of a sudden, just like that, our top leaders in the country step out and just announce, no, the standard now will be this highly accelerated standard of safe as possible. And I honestly question whether safe as possible is a desirable goal or an achievable goal. I don't know that that's really what we're shooting for. And again, I would love to have an opportunity to debate Vice President Biden on this topic. But to me, and if you've read my work over the years, higher education is risk. This is a risky time in people's lives. And this is how people learn. Generations of college-aged Americans have been thrown into harm's way in different ways for decades. My dad's generation, he graduated in 1933, was the Great Depression. And they faced an economic downturn that makes this blip look fairly simple to manage. And then right after that, a lot of college-age folks jumped on boats and went to Europe and Asia and fought to overcome international fascism, and many never returned. And then the great civil rights revolution of the 1960s, which we forget was inherent risk to students that participated. The Freedom Riders put their lives on the line every time they went out. There was violence and danger and murdering and beatings and dog attacks, etc. I mean, these were dangerous times. I had a chance to talk to my good friend Kevin Ross at Lynn University after the last earthquake in Haiti. And I knew he had a big contingent over there. So I called him up and I said, Kevin, how bad is it? And he said, it's bad. And we lost a lot of people. And I said, are you going to go back? And he said, of course we are. That's why we were there. The whole purpose of this enterprise was to help people who are in a terrible position. And there's risk involved with that. The people that went knew what the risks were. And it's a terrible thing to lose people. But higher education is risk. So again, I was pretty startled to see when Compliance University launched that one of its first homilies is that we're shooting for safe as possible. I'm not sure I agree with that. And of course, from a financial point of view, I'm not sure it's achievable. I think it would actually destroy a lot of our wonderful open campus opportunities that we have. I don't know that that's our future. I'll let you decide that. But again, that's a big change from 1999 to 2011. In just a decade, you're fighting over reasonable care, and then suddenly you're fighting over an entirely different metric set by an entirely different set of decision makers. Not the courts, but the federal government in Washington. What are some of the other shifts? And again, as you look at this slide, one of the most significant things that I think has been happening in the law of higher education has been a radical right turn away from discussions about case law to regulatory principles. So that now I spend almost all of my time when I speak, and even at my conference when I plan it, we spend almost all of our time talking about regulatory mandates. And even in the litigation update sections that we do, there's still a heavy compliance component based on regulatory metrics. Make no mistake about it. I spent a lot of time in Washington this spring working on the new National Campus Safety Center and some other projects. Some of you know that I chair the Council of Experts for VTV Foundation. The families that settled with Virginia Tech after the shooting, they've dedicated themselves to many national campus safety initiatives, including the federal government granting this new campus safety center. And as I left Washington and had met with several senators and congresspersons' offices and staff, it hit me that the law of higher education has shifted to Washington, D.C., that there is no question that where once we looked at court cases around 50 states to try to get a sense of what we're doing, we looked at our host states and our accrediting bodies for guidance. Ground zero of higher education law and policy from now through the future is going to be Washington, D.C. And I want to share something else with you, too. I thought, well, maybe this is just an Obama thing. You know, this is this administration, and all administrations eventually change, and we'll have a shift in the wind in Washington. And in a few years, we'll be back to something that's more familiar, like the Reagan era, when the federal government essentially sent Leroy Rooker once a year out to talk about FERPA, and Leroy would try to calm us down. Remember Leroy? I love Leroy. He's a friend. He's a wonderful man. He would try to calm us down about FERPA once a year, but he was cast against type. He was the kind of person who would actually make you more nervous when he was trying to make you calm. And so there would be the need for him to return the following year. And this was a sort of an easy period where Title IX compliance was basically equity compliance in sports and human resource management. You know, it was compartmentable. It was easy to work with. I see now a very strong bipartisan support for heavy federal intervention in higher education. It startled me. I met with extremely conservative Republicans and more left-leaning liberals, and I got the same message in every office I was going to, that our constituents want more accountability, more affordability, more safety. They want a federal government involved in this. And so I think this is here to stay. I think it'll change a little bit as we go through different administrations. The focus areas will shift. The intensity may ramp down somewhat. But the future of the Stetson Law Conference, and I suspect the Vermont Conference as well, will be heavily oriented towards regulatory compliance. And the old days of coming into a group like this and talking about here's a case, there's a case, everywhere a case, although that's interesting and that's still very relevant, has clearly been de-emphasized. Because I'd be willing to bet a lot of you came here today because you're thinking, how in the heck do I come into Title IX compliance? Because I'm at a small school. I'm not Yale with $1 billion endowment. Maybe Yale's here. So how do I do the stuff that I'm reading in the Montana letter, which seems to be written by a Russian author of the mid-20th century? Right? I mean, doesn't it feel like it was written in a prison? You know, and must do this, comrade, colleague, and and if it weren't just that, you may have come for Title II, because I mean, I love the Spring Arbor letter, don't you? I mean, I could have thrown a lot of this stuff. Maybe you don't, but you read the Spring Arbor, everything's blacked out. It reads like a North Korean missile missive. It's like it's got a secret decoder feel to it, and then no one's quite sure what it said. You know, there's a lot of, and then we thought it said something and we were afraid it said that, and then the government thought maybe it did say that, and we've gotten in this. But we have to deal with that because we have issues of direct threat to our students. And I think what the federal government's telling us is that direct threat analysis is no longer viable if an individual simply threatens themselves. Ruh-roh. What are you going to do about that? And so I think a lot of you probably came here because you want to go home with hard compliance knowledge so that you're not the person who triggers the dreaded federal investigation and you become the front page news story. And again, I met with these folks at Montana. We were just out there and spoke to the state of Montana, and the contingent of administrators came over from University of Montana, and the only thing that I can give an equivalency to, this is lawyer speak, is receivership. That's what it felt like. If you've ever done bankruptcy work, which I did a little tiny bit of, it felt like they're in receivership. Because the federal government says, this person's going to do this, we want it by Wednesday, you're going to write a policy, we're not going to like it, we're going to rewrite it, make you rewrite it. We're just going to basically tell you how to do your job. We're going to occupy you for a while. And then when we're done, we'll move on. Next target. It's pretty creepy, isn't it? And what's even got, I think, a little creepier, and this is the next major point, is the Department of Education has awoken from a long regulatory slumber in higher education. I mean, they got caught napping on safe and drug-free school enforcement, Edgar 86, the alcohol stuff. You know, Chronicle called them out on that, so did the internal auditors in the government. They were doing, you know, not too much higher ed enforcement. That's changed. But they have a new partner now, the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice swung in on the Montana Title IX matter. Some people, I think, wistfully commented that, oh, the Department of Education will continue to be the leader. Justice is just here on a whim. Oh, no. Oh, no. I met with top justice officials this spring, and let's not forget that the original enforcement of federal civil rights laws in higher education came out of the Department of Justice. It was Bobby Kennedy that led the way. And they remember that. They plan to get more involved. The new National Campus Safety Center is connected through the Department of Justice. The bill in Congress that would formally establish a National Campus Safety Center, as opposed to create it simply as an administrative arm of the Department of Justice, locates it in DOJ. And they know that. This is why they've ramped up what they're doing, because the future of enforcement in higher education is not just DOE. It's going to be a collaborative enterprise, strong leadership from DOJ and DOE, and probably some others like HUD. A few other actors you're not even used to working with yet will probably be pulled into the mess. So we've got to get used to the fact that this is not just Russell and Ali or Arnie Duncan or the gang down at DOE, because that's the blankets and milk people. They're the K through 12 group. They're huggy. They're K through 12. They're kind of education oriented. But Department of Justice is cops and robbers. This is bad guys and guns and drugs and RICO, and there's a little bit of Nancy Grace running around in there. And you can see the tone differential when you read the Montana letter. Did you notice the difference between Yale? Like, good for you, you did culture change, and good for you, good for you. It had a real K through 12 feel, and the Department of Justice said, oh, I see you did a lot of things because you knew we were coming, and good for you, because it may not be good enough, and we're going to hang around until we're sure we got what we need. And it's definitely got a real cops, robbers, lawyers, bad guys feel to it. We're going to have to get used to that. Working with Justice, who's not used to working with us, is going to be an interesting development. Again, one of the major changes that I've seen, because when we wrote Rights and Responsibilities 1, the Department of Justice was basically invisible in the safety dimensions of higher education. It was to the point it really didn't matter having much to talk about with that at the time. Boy, has that changed. Changing role of lawyers and legalists. I think this is going to be the biggest sea change right here, and I mean, I could almost just do this slide for the rest of our time. I will not, but I do want to linger on this one a little bit. There's no question that lawyering in higher education is about to go through a revolution. The skill sets are going to be re-emphasized. It used to be, who'd we hire for our lawyers? People with good employment law experience, intellectual property, government regulatory experience at a state level. They were pretty predictable skill sets. I could pull up the job descriptions that were put out when jobs opened up, and they all pretty much read the same way. 2 to 5 years experience minimum, quality law firm or something like that. The new emphasis point, federal regulatory experience, and a temperament and a focus to be able to deal with that, how do you manage it? It's something that was not emphasized, but has been. We had something startling happen out of our center at Stetson, and I know Charlie and I talked about this, but my former center manager, who was a law student and had graduated and passed the bar, worked with the center for a couple of years and was hired directly into a general counsel's job at New College of Florida. And that, among my colleagues, drew quite a buzz, because they all called up and they said, well, you must have pulled some strings to get him in. And I said, absolutely not. A lot of the new college presidents that are coming in are looking for people that understand regulatory law and principles, know who to call to get services, et cetera. I mean, for example, there are a lot of people out there that need Clery compliance, but don't realize that they can call Margolis and Healy, a leading provider of services related to Clery. They just don't know to do that. And it's amazing who they do hire. And then the mistakes that are made that have to be fixed by quality operations like Margolis Healy. Again, this emphasizes a new skill set, a new orientation, being able to work in an industry that's becoming like the military industry, where we're going to have a lot of outside vendors, we're going to have to be dealing constantly with regulatory impacts, and we're going to have to learn how to get our message heard in Washington in a way that Washington can hear it. For those of you that are with me in the breakout session to follow, we'll talk a lot about the cost and affordability agenda. And frankly, as an industry, we're getting killed. The people's voices who are being heard are not higher education institutions primarily. It's foundations and interest groups that are winning the battle right now. We're going to have to learn how to get our message, the narrative, and have it heard nationally. It's going to take a different skill set. This year at NACUA's annual meeting, one of the things that was really notable was the startling rise in outside boutique firms offering higher education law services. This has been a business that historically has been lawyered through general counsels with very long relationships with boards. Often the general counsel lives past several presidents and even leadership on the board. But it's becoming increasingly apparent that outsourcing services is going to be a necessity. That's the growth industry. And again, I'm not pushing it, but I want you to be aware of it. And I think there's another related and allied issue here, is the rise of what I call legalists. And this is, I think, the biggest thing that's happening that's being distracted when people think about lawyers, is what we're actually doing on college campuses is we're increasing the number of people with significant legal training, people who are doing jobs that are education jobs, but with a strong legal overtone. And I see people running and sometimes spending absurd amounts of money to become trained and even certified in special skills related to compliance work. We are building a class of legalists very quickly. I would encourage you to turn to the one organization that's had the most experience with this in our recent history, which is ASCA, Conduct. The ASCA has been dealing with a lot of legal compliance issues as a core part of their delivery. To be a good discipline officer, you have to know a lot about the law. There's just no way to survive in that job anymore unless you have a certain skill set. Legal compliance certainly won't be promoted out of that work if you don't. And I think they've been bracing for this for a long time. It doesn't mean the other organizations are not prepared, but I do think ASCA set a nice example for what the future looks like in creating not just more lawyers, but more legalists. The President spoke earlier about the traditional role of lawyers being to identify and contain and manage risk. And I see a future where lawyers will be working more collaboratively with clients who are much more sophisticated about legal materials than at any point in the past. And in many ways, I think the future lawyers will be relying very heavily on legalists to help them get their job done with the unmanageable number of issues that are following on campus. To give you an idea of some of the legalists of the future, Title IX coordinator. That person may be a JD or a legally trained person, but they're doing an education job even if they have legal training. Chief Compliance Officer, which is one of the growth areas that's out there. More schools will be looking to create someone who's the centerpiece of compliance efforts. That could be done through the legal office, but again, compliance has dimensions beyond legal advice. It's an educational job, not just a legal job. So I see that job of the future being a classic legalist job. I could go on and on. I think even in residence life, you're likely to see the development of a kind of an equity class, similar to what we saw in sports, to try to manage housing and urban development mandates and disability mandates. This is the future, and I see it happening right in front of me. It does worry me just a little bit, because the law can pollute the way you think about education. Parker Young came to my event. We gave him an award because we want to honor the fact that from Georgia was born Stetson, and from Stetson was born Vermont, and some other conference someday will be born from this. That interdisciplinary work will carry on the torch. And I wanted to recognize Parker. And he got me, he said, I have a simple message. He said, don't let the law ruin higher education. And he stepped down, and I thought, that's exactly what we needed to hear. We have to be very careful that in rushing to be do-gooders and to comply with the law, that we don't kill the very thing we're trying to protect. The law is a helpful tool, but also a very dangerous tool for an environment. Because law is about opposition, mistrust, positions, and it's not focused primarily on teaching and learning outcomes. It's a different kind of world, takes a different kind of leadership. Deborah Rohde, a famous legal scholar, has just written an excellent book on law, lawyers, and leaders, and I suggest you read it. She's got some interesting thoughts about what it means to be a lawyer and a leader, and the challenges of having those kinds of interdisciplinary work metrics put in front of you. So again, this is a big change. When I came in the business 25 years ago, there was Don Gehring and a young guy named John Lowry. And there were a couple of people that got this, a handful of people that were working the edges of the law from another perspective. They were the proto-legalists of an earlier generation. Now I come to rooms of a couple hundred people with legally trained folks, and a lot of times you know more about the compliance issues than I do, because that's what you're doing on the front line of the job. You're actually communicating with the Department of Ed. Rise of college courts. I didn't see this one coming, but one of the things that's really interesting, especially out of the Title IX guidance, is the federal government basically forcing us to create a federally governed adjudicative system within our educational institutions? I'll let you decide. I've taken a position on this in my writings, but I've seen this steady accretion away from an educational model to one that's more court-like. I ran into Jim Lancaster in the hall. And Jim, you're probably in the room someplace, but may not want me to out you in front of everybody. And Jim and I worked together and around each other for years, and I remember when issues of plagiarism were primarily issues for an educational institution to manage, but all of a sudden, the federal government wants a role in the standard of proof, the kind of training people have, what kind of appeals are available. They've told us not to use mediation. I mean, we're getting very specific mandates from a federal government on the future of how to run our campuses. I'm seeing a court system. And we rejected that idea years and years ago when we picked up, this always happens when I'm presenting, by the way. I'm grateful that the sprinkler system didn't go off. But there's some kind of a gremlin that follows me around. The German system that we picked up on, they actually, I don't know if you realize, but they ran an educational court system. They were imprisoning students well into the 1930s, which sometimes seems like a good idea, but we'll go down that road another time together. But we deliberately chose not to go down that path, but now the federal government seems to be a bit enamored with it. There's a problem with acquaintance rape in society. You should fix it. The best court system to fix acquaintance rape should be college courts. Interesting. Don't necessarily agree with it, but it's an interesting philosophy. And again, entirely new in Compliance U. This is a good one. The rise of enterprise risk management, ERM. I hope no one leaves this event without a greater familiarity of ERM if they didn't already have it coming in. Enterprise risk management has been growing rapidly. From a point back in 1999 when you talked about risk management on most campuses, it was someplace in the business office where somebody filled out the insurance forms to make sure you could get your certificate of occupancy for your residence hall. I mean, risk management was not a top job in higher education. The A&M incident changed that, and risk management mutated into a very big focus on safety. But what's really been interesting is in the last couple of years, particularly since Penn State and Virginia Tech, there's been a coming of consciousness to realize that higher education can benefit from strategic risk management thinking. And I want to plant a seed. Is old school risk management is make bad things not happen or reduce the risk of bad things. New school risk management is risk equals opportunity. How do we look not just for the challenge, but the opportunity? And again, as we get a little further in, I want to sketch a couple of ideas of how we look for opportunity in a land of risk, because I think it's actually there. It's right in front of us. It's just hard to see when the boogeyman is screaming at you. I also see three focus areas. And I think as you go forward doing the kind of training that you're going to be doing here in Vermont, or if you come to Stetson, or what other institution starts to open an interdisciplinary law and policy conference, I see three areas of focus. When I do my planning for my event, these are the three strategic areas of most significance for most people right now. And again, this is intimately connected to Compliance U. First is increased safety. I think what we've seen with the creation of the National Campus Safety Center is the protozoan idea of a student federal civil right to a basic level of safety. It's beginning. A civil right that got lost in the 1960s and 70s has finally taken root. It's still in its infancy, but I think the great challenge to the National Campus Safety Center will be to see that opportunity through. Because I think consumers of higher education want some level of campus safety. So I think we're going to be talking about campus safety till we're blue in the face for the next 10 to 15 years, until we get to a sustainable, achievable level, which I don't think we're at all right now. Until we get there, we're going to continue to have that debate. But I think something very significant's been born, and I'll say it to you here. I think there's now an emergent federal civil right for safety, that students should be entitled to be free from discrimination on race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, and they should also have some articulable rights to basic safety. That is a revolutionary idea in American higher education, not revolutionary to other education sectors around the globe, but in the United States, it remains still somewhat controversial. So expect it to become a very fascinating point of discussion as we go forward. What else? I lumped the White House initiatives because that's really my breakout session, but I'm going to be more specific and say right now, core mission delivery is on the table. The regulators in Washington are very interested in how we deliver educational services. What are the outcomes? How are we measuring those outcomes? Are they cost effective? Are they being delivered in a fair and equitable way? They're sitting in our factory and they want to see how we build cars. And they're not going to leave. They have occupied us. I see a couple of outliers in Congress that are saying get Congress and the president out of colleges. The overwhelming majority of people I've met with seem to believe deeply that there is some role for the federal government in core mission accountability. That does not mean everyone agrees with Obama's agenda, not by any stretch of the imagination, but I think there is some broad agreement that core mission accountability is here to stay. Which means what? You're going to be talking about enrollment management. You're going to be talking about Richard Collenberg's work on class and the impact of class on accessibility. You're going to be talking about the Lumina Foundation and degree qualification profiles. This is the future of this kind of interdisciplinary work. And by the way, it's not disconnected. The federal government, I think, is well aware of the fact that if you want people to graduate, and graduate happy, and graduate on time, and not accumulate a lot of debt, you've got to reduce safety issues that are barriers to that. I mean, you know what happens to a typical person who's sexually assaulted on campus. You know what the typical outcome is? Overwhelming. They leave, and they never return. So there is a retention statistic. Not just a victim of a violent crime, not just a victim of discrimination, but there is a core mission delivery issue. Safety is intimately connected to what we're doing. And let's be honest, the elephant in the table, we all know that high-risk alcohol rates play heavily into time to graduation, the amount of debt that's accumulated, satisfaction at graduation, the ability to get a first job, et cetera, et cetera. That if we're going to tackle core mission, it's going to connect to safety. This is a beach ball, not separate issues. And I think the federal government is beginning to see it, even though they speak separately. Through Obama, typically talks about core mission delivery. Biden talks about safety. But they go back to the same house to meet. And I know these conversations are taking place. What else? The far horizon of Compliance University is governance issues. And again, I put it under the more inflammatory title of white-collar crime because I think that's going to be the stimulating idea, is I think we're facing significant governance issues going forward. And I think they come in a variety of metrics, but not the least of which is who articulates academic freedom and on behalf of whom? Who protects that? I'll be honest, my colleagues in NACUA, a lot of them are very cynical about academic freedom because here's how they see it. A lousy professor who should have been fired 10 times over, as a last-ditch effort, throws in, you took away my academic freedom. Really? Stabbing students repeatedly is academic freedom? No, it's not actually. And so you tend to become quite cynical about academic freedom, and you get into the case that the president alluded to here just a minute ago, the Garcetti case, where the Supreme Court's been heard to say things that may potentially limit academic freedom. And circuit courts are struggling with that right now. This is a huge governance issue. And among the issues that I see on the far horizon, and I'll signal this again for you later, is I see the rise of a student affairs administrative class as an academic discipline. That we're about to take our place at the table, whether the other disciplines want us or not. The old faculty versus administrator divide, it's old school. That's Run DMC. And I like the old stuff, I do. I like my Beastie Boys, I do, but if you want to hear the new wave, the stuff that's coming off, the new stuff in the future, I see student affairs rising as a true academic discipline. And I see blips on the screen. For example, Title IX. Compliance U, the federal government said, you've got to protect your Title IX coordinator. Keep them free from bias and improper influence. How do you do that? Well, tenure would be one way to do it. But you could do other employment protections. In fact, I think the federal government actually imagines that the Title IX coordinator will speak out on matters of public concern if they're concerned. They'll step up and say, I don't like what's happening at my school in the athletic department, and it needs to stop. And I think they would expect the school to protect that person and the courts to protect that person. I see a new era of student affairs administration. I see a blip on a screen. I read CLS Martinez. I don't know if you read that or not. This is the all-comers policy at Hastings Law School. And the Supreme Court now talks about academic autonomy, a word that I hadn't really seen too much of before. When they're talking about administrators, could it be that certain members of the Supreme Court now imagine that there's a correlate, that traditional classroom faculty who have academic freedom, maybe the correlate for administrators is academic autonomy? I don't know, but I see this on the future. I also see the leadership structures coming under stress, the way we pick our board members, even the kinds of presidents that we select. Your president's a lawyer, a law professor, a decorated one, by the way, at UVM here, and I'm going to brag on him a little bit, but in my field, he's very well known and very highly respected, so he's not just a great college president, he's a great lawyer and legal academic and well known in our field, and he actually represents a new generation of college presidents who are legally trained. John Alger just took the presidency at James Madison. I know we have someone from JMU here. Congratulations, you've got John. He's a lovely guy, and we adore him down at Stetson. I see new types of people coming into leadership roles, more sensitive to compliance issues. I see different types of board members being attracted. And one of the things I'm doing more of than ever is meeting with boards and presidents and talking with them about their role in compliance. The old days of, psst, hey, you in that administrative job, you better do this or you'll be in trouble. Those days are rapidly ending. Boards are starting to realize we should be very careful about jumping into operational management on compliance issues, because if we do, we'll find ourselves in front of a grand jury. And again, the stuff that's unfolding at Penn State, it's going to be real interesting to watch. Is this the Watergate of higher education? I don't know. You tell me. But I think it's going to put a lot of emphasis on the third critical prong of Compliance U, which is governance issues. Going forward, safety, core mission delivery, governance. These are the three hot topics of the future, and they're all driven by legal compliance, most of it coming straight out of Washington. God, I hate to say it out loud, but will we have a time when the Department of Justice has a white-collar crime strike force just for higher ed? They don't now. Their RICO enforcement's primarily limited to violent crimes and drugs because they're so budget limited, but is it inconceivable that such a thing could evolve? Not in the least. All right, switch. Hey, look at that. What do you know? The renewed interest in safety and wellness. We mentioned the reasonable care versus safe as possible metric. Again, I've ranted about that, but this is something I think we've got to have forefront, because if the public expectation is that we create environments that are safe as possible, college as we know it will come to an end. In order to get safe as possible, no more open campuses. We're going to have to completely change our residence facilities. Even the way we manage our classrooms will be radically different. We've got to get in the battle of narratives over what is the appropriate level of safety. I'll editorialize. I think the future of college safety is moving away from non-specific metrics to science. We actually know a lot about safety science now. This is the work I've been doing with VTV Foundation as we've been working on the 32 NCSI index. We've discovered that there is actually a lot of science knowledge. It's just not widely known, readily available, and a lot of campuses don't have the technical skills to be able to bring it to bear even if they knew it existed. So we can build safer cars, but we need help to do it. I hope a future of Compliance University is more facilitative and less judging. I'll tell you one thing I don't like about this new compliance world. It's you must, you will, or else. We need help. We don't need to be scolded. People in this room are doing their very best every day to bring safety and wellness to their campuses. You don't need to scold and scare you. I need to support you. And in the future, I hope, and that's where my work will be focused, is to try to get the federal government to realize that it can play a facilitative role, not a judging and damning role. Occasionally, Toby Keith needs to come out and whack somebody over the head with a stick to get people in line. I mean, I'm not totally averse to that. There are times I've seen some pretty dark things in this business, but for the most part, we're still the best people on the planet. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm a lawyer, and I've become very cynical about human nature. You go to court, you'll get even more cynical. Go on a Monday morning, drunk drivers, wife beaters, thieves, robbers, and then the higher ed person comes in, and you're the people that actually run towards gunfire. Look at LaVue Labrescu at Virginia Tech, who blocks the door knowing he's going to get killed, so his kids can get out the door. You going to get that at Burger King? What other business is going to do that for you? What kind of people are we? We're good people, and I want to make sure the law supports us and doesn't stand in our way or be too judging. I mentioned tying reasonable care to core mission delivery. As you go through the couple of days here, I want this in the back of your mind all the time, because I'm telling you right now, the federal government is tying core mission delivery to safety and wellness. The new metric that's going to be hitting is enhanced financial aid reporting requirements to qualify for federal student aid. And they're going to ask you, what's your Edgar 86 compliance plan? Are you safe and drug-free school compliant? Tell me about Title IX. Tell me about your Clery compliance. Tell me about your Title II compliance, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, to get the money to support our institutions, we're going to have to show that we're good citizens of federal compliance. And believe me, this has already started. It's going to accelerate. If you want the cash for students, for the loans, and for the grants, we're going to have to be paying attention to safety. Enrollment management is safety management. They are one and the same, and they're coming closer all the time. So we can look at them as separate issues, but they're not. Changing role of campus police. I've known Margolis and Healy a long time, and always been a big fan of campus police. When I came into this business, if people didn't know what to do, they ran to their cops. So anything that there wasn't a solution for, let's get the campus police involved. When I started 20-some years ago, most campus cops reported to a business officer. They'd have trouble getting a meeting with a VP of Student Affairs, and if they ran into a college president, it was probably over a parking issue. A lot of times I was the person introducing the campus police to their lawyer for the first time. They many times didn't even get a chance to have any face time with their lawyers. And I'm going to tell you, one of the great things that's been happening in the last 25 years is that people are starting to recognize the important role that campus safety and security plays in our day-to-day operations. Today, campus security and police sit on care and threat assessment teams. And what I love about it is the teachers now who used to prop their doors open and not lock their cars and give all sorts of really bad safety advice to students are now coming to care and threat assessment teams and asking police, counselors, and others for help because they can't manage the kids in their classroom. It's completely flipped. To do our job in the classroom, we need help from people with training in law enforcement. And I think, again, the signal of the National Campus Safety Center going to a recognized group with hard policing experience in higher education, it's one of the most important symbolic acts in the last 25 years for campus safety. It says Congress recognizes your important role on campus. We're going to fund it, and we're going to give you power and visibility to send your message out there. Way to go, campus policing. Way to go, UVM. Way to go, Margolis Healy. So I really, again, I want to give big props out for that. What else has changed? With safety, there's been a new emphasis on environmental management. People are picking up public health modelings and starting to use the science of safety and wellness to deploy on their campuses. Even though NIAAA and others, Institute of Medicine, pushed this kind of work as a promising work for the field, many schools had lagged behind. But I'm starting to see now people say, you know what, there really is something to the science of wellness. And of course, NIAAA, National Institute of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse, is soon to drop a new metric on alcohol and drug use on campus. This is in process right now, and you all should be watching it. It would be inconceivable to me that next year's event here wouldn't have a session dealing just with that or related to it. Because we need to know about, in our interdisciplinary work, what are the public health models telling us? How do they integrate with the law? Very connected to this is community efficacy work. And I had the privilege of seeing Felton Earls, Dr. Felton Earls, present. I felt like I was back at Harvard. It was one of those presentations where the really smart guy gets up in front of you and he talks for a while and you feel really stupid. You're thinking, I'm not even sure what he's talking about. And I should know. You know that feeling of being lost in front of an Uber bench? And there he went, and I thought, I'm not sure I'm qualified to sit here. But then he brought everything together in a brilliant way, and it all made perfect sense to me, both theoretically and practically. They were doing studies in Chicago about violence levels. And what they realized is that the number one variable that was determining safety wasn't the presence of police, income levels, the things you would think. It was measured levels of community efficacy, getting involved. And I have to say, when I sat there, I was in Virginia Beach hearing this speech, and I thought, this is what, from a lawyer's point of view, I've been pushing for years, is to get people out of a bystanding mode into a proactive intervention mode, to step up into the drug dealer on the street corner and say, don't do that, get out of my neighborhood. Or the kid in the residence hall who knows there's a creep that's preying on women, doing something, telling the RA, getting involved. This is where the future of college safety lies. It goes right down to the individual student, and it's about creating communities of efficacy where we feel empowered as opposed to frighted, scared, bunkered, etc. And I worry that bystanderism and compliance work tends to give us that incentive to retreat into our compliance bunker. I have filled out all the forms, therefore I won't get sued. This is not what creates a good campus. What creates a great campus is what has always created a great campus, which your president mentioned, is education. And let's be honest, and this is a weird thing for a lawyer and a law professor to say, but fundamentally, we care for people's kids. That's what we are. I mean, we have older learners too. We care for them, but we're caring for people. This is a business of love. And administrators typically are the people who are on the front line of delivering it. And you know what? If no one in the organizational chart is delivering love to our students, someone else will. It is a necessary component of higher education. Genuine caring. My dog knows the difference between being kicked and tripped over. I'm a clumsy guy. I have diplopia, one eye is off. I just tore my meniscus. That's why I'm sitting, so I apologize for that. But I played sports and I tear it in the shower. What a hero. There's a front page of the Globe for that, right? I feel really good about that. I'm clumsy, and my dog knows when I'm being clumsy. He looks at me like, maybe next time I'll get a less clumsy owner. They understand, and so do parents and students. They can tell the difference. In fact, it's interesting when the regulators come to campus, this is what they stress. They say, Charlie Brown's pumpkin patch. You know why the great pumpkin rises in your pumpkin patch, right? Sincerity. That's what brings the great pumpkin, and that's what brings compliance. It's got to come from here. It has to have love. And if we talk too much about law and get into compliance mentality, we kill the thing that's our strongest play with our customers and is most likely to bring about the results that we want. Just a thought. And again, an odd thing to hear from a lawyer and a law professor. There we go. All right, next slide. Bigger perspective. I've been hinting at this. Here are some thoughts again to take away. Notice that there is a focus on core mission delivery. That's one of the big three rather. And there is a clear connection between the President's affordability agenda and other major issues in Compliance U. So that as the Biden side of the White House is pushing for safety, you don't get graduation time, retention, low debt, unless you have a reasonably safe campus. You're going to struggle crazily to try to get to the President's agenda unless you're meeting some of the other compliance objectives as well. These things are intimately connected, and I guarantee you that as we go forward, you may see the application of gainful employment-like standards to the nonprofit sector that are sensitive to safety as well as money. This is very likely to take place as the evolution goes forward. Even degree qualification profiles, which I think are a critical component of what the administration is really trying to get at, and I'll talk more about this in the breakout for those of you that are more particularly interested in this. Even talking about competencies and assessing competencies becomes intimately tied to safety, wellness, and other metrics. That you're not going to get good quality degrees and graduation times unless you're taking care of these other issues. And then I want to tie it to something else. And again, I'm going to give you a future vision that may or may not come to pass, but I'd be prepared for it. The President's agenda clearly intends to tie compliance to lending and granting, which means the more compliant we are, the more likely we are to access funds. In the future, who gives a hoot about U.S. News and World Report? I want to know what my compliance scorecard looks like, because if I can get the money, I beat the guy down the street. That's what it's going to completely change the game. Although we're still going to care what our peers think about us. If we're the #1 ranked school in U.S. News and World Report but don't qualify for student aid, we're out of business, unless for liberty. Not too many of us could survive. So it's a rare occurrence that we would be able to ignore what's coming. And I'm going to tell you, they're going to tie it to compliance with more than just money issues. It's going to be connected to wellness and safety issues. This appears to be the future. I'm going to take it even a step further. There just isn't going to be the money from the federal government to support higher education in the United States. The future of higher education in the United States clearly depends on a vibrant supplemental lending environment. And in many ways, what's being set up is a perfect environment for supplemental lending. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see the future supplemental lenders to go through a mortgage application with students and even institutions and rating them on a variety of metrics, including graduation times, average debt, employment after graduation, and yes, safety, and even corporate governance. The new lenders learned a lot from the mortgage crisis. Clearly, the future of global lending is education. We are being driven in a human capital world now. This is where people are going to be spending their money. This is where they're going to take loans. The lenders are setting up a world where the lending guidelines will be a lot more protective than they were during the mortgage fiascos in the past. This is the future. And how quickly it comes to pass, how detailed it is, I don't know, but I see things accelerating in a very, very quick way. National Campus Safety Center, again, I think the Campus Safety Center has a very particular mission right now that is somewhat disconnected from core mission delivery issues, but because it's located in Department of Justice, working collaboratively with DOE, there will be influences on even the National Campus Safety Center's future that are connecting with this. And for example, I know there's pressure in Congress to take very stern action on schools that are considered party schools, to tie federal lending to that, to figure out who are the schools that are out of control with the drinking and hit them hard, hit them in the pocket by cutting back their federal funding. Now again, I don't know that that's broadly held, but I have heard those statements articulated quite openly, quite unabashedly in Congress. So again, it is on the road. All right, we're beginning to wrap up. Just a couple of final thoughts as we start going out the door. A couple of critical areas. First, facilitator versus compliance U. A couple things to think about. I've imagined college students as visitors in a facilitative world, learners on a pathway to lifelong learning. The federal government sees them as consumers. They talk about students as consumers. If we don't fight back, that's who they're going to become. The narrative will be, we have customers, not students. Educational mission, I think, is being very stressed because the pressure is to come into technical compliance. I see a lot of my good friends doing this work for 25 to 30 years. They're retiring. They said, this is not why I got into this business. And that disturbs me greatly. Is the future of higher education going to be some really, really skilled legalists who are just shy of practicing lawyers? Is that what this room is going to be filled with in its 50th anniversary? It's up to you. And it's these kinds of conferences that have the courage to discuss those issues. I see the skill sets of SSAOs shifting and being pressured to become more legalistic, become legalists. I think it's imperative for good student affairs administrators to continue to define what makes their field professional and unique, and why service delivery that's not primarily focused on technical legal compliance is a core feature of the business. I know NASPA is working on this kind of project right now. I applaud future projects of that kind. Shared responsibility is a hallmark of a facilitative university. But I see a world that's getting more oppositional, where the parents are calling up, complaining. I see interest groups organizing against us, attacking us, and I see bunkering and warfare. I think the spring of 2014 could be an interesting time. It could be very interesting. Those who can't pay their debts, those who have been victims of Title IX issues, I think they're organizing, they're getting more oppositional, and social media is ramping it up. We are not the enemy. They are not our opponents. But a legalistic world does tend to cast people into that role, and I think we have to constantly work at that. Critical areas of focus. This is the laundry list. These are the areas, and I'd be willing to bet just about every conference you're going to has a session on at least one session dedicated to at least all of these. Title IX, Clery and the SAVE Act, FERPA, the inevitable topic, although I think it's the one thing that's gone down in interest, I think, under the compliance world. Title II, direct threat issues, ADA issues, fair housing, we mentioned that. Look what's at the bottom of the list, civil liability. That's, I think, de-emphasized in the compliance world in favor of regulatory mandates. But the other one that's rising very quickly is criminal liability. And the future of interdisciplinary training in this field is going to have to spend a lot more time on criminal issues, because it raises real issues of who's the college lawyer representing, who can I talk to, what is the role of an internal and external investigation, how does insurance play into all of this. It's a totally different ballgame when the criminal people get involved. And I've been around a couple of incidents that I think completely alter the dynamic when people are involved on the criminal side. All right. So how do we win the battle in Compliance University? It's pretty dark stuff. I mean, you spend an hour talking about all the problems. What's the winning hand? I like Star Trek. I like the Kobayashi episode. When I see something unwinnable, I think it's a challenge. I think we can beat it. Number one, focus on the spirit of the law. What was the real reason the law was brought into business in the first place? What's the spirit of Title IX? To reduce sex discrimination that creates barriers to educational opportunity. I think we can do it better than the law. I don't think college courts are the answer. I think we have better tools to reduce sex discrimination that creates barriers to educational opportunity. I'll give you one little tip just here, just a thought. No one thinks to do this, but the sexual predators that prey on our young women, prey on them, they didn't start in college. It's a career. It's a remorseless sociopathic behavior. Read David Lisak's work. That behavior evidences itself in grade school, in high school. If we get better connectivity with K through 12, we're going to be able to identify a lot of our predators without ever having to do background checks or full criminal. It's right there. It's just we don't connect with the K through 12 world, and so the predators land here in an opportunity zone invisible to us. Just a little thought. And I'll go even deeper. I think we've got an intimacy crisis on campus. I think we've got a lot of people who hook up when they've been drinking heavily, and they think intimacy is hooking up when you're intoxicated. And it makes me sad, because the truth is, you get just a couple good friends in life. Intimacy is a hard thing to achieve. It takes work, it takes dedication to task, it takes luck. Having 500 BFFs on Facebook is an illusion of connectivity. There's an educational challenge here, and the predators take advantage of it. They know that there are a lot of poor people out there that struggle to identify genuine feelings and fall prey to the false lies and promises of others. Being proactive. I emphasized this before. With risk comes opportunity. So, yeah, we have all this Title IX stuff that we're dealing with, for example, but there's an opportunity here. If you can create an educational environment that is barrier-free, where we've embraced the fight against discrimination, you're going to draw more students. So instead of thinking of this as, I've got to comply with the April 4th letter in Montana and then Chapel Hill and whatever it comes out, there's an educational opportunity lying here. We can actually sell a product that people want to buy. And I'm going to tell you what, the consumers, with all the talk about cost savings, the consumers want an expensive product. They want safety. They're willing to pay for it. They know what we're doing is valuable. They line up to come into our prime institutions. Looking for educational solutions. What's the educational solution to the legal problem? Instead of trying to meet the law head-on in its own terms, work collaboratively with your lawyers and your legally trained people to come up with what educational solution could inexpensively help us confront this issue. For example, all this Title II stuff and the fair housing stuff in particular with the comfort and service animals, it occurred to me the other day that higher education in the United States has actually disassociated animals from the human learning process quite significantly. Most human beings learned for centuries, eons, in combination with the animal world, and we've taken the animal culture out of our learning environment. There's an educational opportunity here. We use dogs in law school to calm down law students. It actually works. It reduces stress. It's just one little thing, but where is the educational solution? Why think about this strictly in legal terms? Embrace ERM. I've already made my sales pitch for that. Reduce the use of legalisms in your language and semiotic systems. I'm a big believer in linguistics and semiotics. If you have a system that communicates through legalisms, you're going to create a culture of that. How can we communicate with people in a language of education, which is really our prime mission? I'm constantly trying to edit things to remove legalistic terms when in fact we could be using an educational term that's more meaningful to our environment. I'd pay attention to this. I think it's quite significant. You've heard me rant on about the need for a fair and balanced system for accountability based on science. I think we're still some distance from that. But I think the great hope is that we can come to a place where there's a balance of accountability, responsibility, and facilitation. That if Rights and Responsibilities 3 ever gets written, hopefully we'll be able to claim that prize and say that after a long journey from bystanding through Compliance U, we finally found a place that we can all live with, more or less, where there's a balance of shared responsibility, accountability, and facilitation. I just think we're still quite a ways from that. Two last points, and then I wrap up. In Compliance U, we have to be very careful about the role of experts and vendors in our culture. There are a lot of people out there that want to sell snake oil. This is typical of any compliance-driven industry. We need people on campus to be skilled at vetting quality services so that we know that what we're getting is actually helping us and isn't making promises that aren't realistic or not supported by the science. We don't have much skill at this. It's not a culture. We weren't trained it in our MED or PhD programs, really even in law school. We also have to brace for the fact that Compliance University breeds experts, people who then become very well paid, particularly in court, to take positions on things, a kind of science we're not used to. Lawyers are. It's called Daubert and Fry, but the education world is not quite ready for this yet, not broadly conceived on our core mission delivery. So a little bit of a warning. And then finally, the evolution of student affairs into an academic profession. This is a revolutionary idea. You're going to hear me write more about this over the next few years. It's, I think, probably where I'm going to trail a lot of the end stage of my career off. But what I see when I look at Student Affairs Administration is I see a discipline that's about to be born, an academic discipline that deserves equivalency at the table. We are not like project managers at a construction site. We are teaching. We're just doing it a little differently than other disciplines did. But I remember a day when the sociology professors were looked down on. I was a philosophy major at Harvard, and I took a class in the sociology department. And my head instructor came to me and he said, "Why are you taking a class in sociology? That is not an academic discipline. That is simply a hobby." I was taught by Sheldon Cooper in my philosophy department, and then I realized what a mistake they made, because sociology now is certainly an equivalent discipline. I think we're headed in the same direction. Make us a profession, make us into an academic discipline, and it's going to change the metric of Compliance U. I want to thank you for your time. And again, great conference. It's great to see you all again. Good luck with the rest of the event. Thanks to everyone. Enjoy your lunch. See you afterwards when I come back.